Thank you, Madam President. Yesterday I came to the Senate floor to discuss two amendments that I had filed to the budget agreement that would have addressed, I think, an egregious part of this agreement, which is the cuts to military retiree benefits. In particular, I think the most egregious part of it is those who have been disabled. We've all been to Walter Reed and seen and met our brave heroes, some who have lost limbs, serving our country in Afghanistan and Iraq, and yet in this agreement, we are cutting their cost of living increases for the retirement that they earned on behalf of our country. And so yesterday I came to the floor to talk about what I think is an appalling part of this budget agreement, but also to say that why can't we amend the budget agreement and fix this now? And I offered two possibilities of how we would do that, two amendments that I filed on this. I'm sure others can find in the trillions of dollars. CBO has said we're going to spend over the next 10 years $47 trillion. We can't find $6 billion rather than taking it from our military retirees. But today I also come, and what happened yesterday on the floor is that there was a motion to take down the tree so that we could actually amend this and fix provisions like that, and it was voted down. So now we have no ability to amend this budget agreement, and so I can't bring the amendments I talked about yesterday to help our military retirees and ensure that they don't get singled out in this agreement, which I think is appalling and wrong. But I also can't bring an amendment that I also filed that addresses an issue that's very important to the state of New Hampshire. And that agreement is an objection I have to a particular provision in the budget agreement that would make it easier for the Senate to pass legislation requiring online retailers to become the tax collectors for the states and the rest of the nation. This so-called Marketplace Fairness Act that the Senate passed earlier this year, within this budget agreement, there is what's called a reserve fund that allows the chairman of the Budget Committee to bypass certain procedural limitations that are normally allowed, and procedural objections you have, and all members have, to these types of legislation, budgetary objections, and these procedural objections are waived when these types of reserve funds are passed. And this provision, which I fought on the Senate floor, on the Senate budget, it did eventually get passed, is included in this agreement, even though since this body has passed the Marketplace Fairness Act, the House has refused to take it up. The House has wisely found that there are major objections to this piece of legislation, which would require businesses, many of these businesses around the country that we see thriving on the internet, to become the tax collectors for the rest of the nation. In fact, my state of New Hampshire does not have a sales tax, and what it would require is that my businesses in New Hampshire, online businesses that have written to me, it would place tremendous burdens on them. They would have to become the tax collectors for nearly 10,000 tax jurisdictions in this country, trampling on New Hampshire's choice not to have a sales tax, and also, I think, putting a tremendous burden on businesses to do the jobs of the states in becoming tax collectors for the rest of the nation. This legislation is bad for the economy, and I think it's bad for businesses, and particularly businesses in my home state of New Hampshire. And so I object to the provision, the reserve fund that is in this budget, and I have filed an amendment that would strike that provision. But again, no amendments are going to be heard on this budget agreement because the majority leader has filled the tree and said there will be no amendments heard, no matter what the merits of the amendment, no matter how important the amendments are, including amendments that I talked about that impact and help address the real egregious provision in here that impacts our military retirees. And this is just another example, I think, on an issue that's very important to the state of New Hampshire, where I allowed to bring my amendment forward. I would have again expressed my opposition to this reserve fund that is within this budget that is objectionable, that makes it easier to pass future legislation, a future version of the Marketplace Fairness Act that will put a tremendous burden on businesses in New Hampshire, and it's wrong to have online businesses become the tax collectors for the nation. So, Madam President, I believe we should be allowed to amend this budget agreement, to vote on these amendments, and particularly on issues that are important to our men and women in uniform, as I've described. But not only that, this issue on the remote collection of sales taxes by businesses throughout the country, online businesses, is a very important issue to the state of New Hampshire, which does not have a sales tax, but not just the state of New Hampshire, to online businesses across the country who do not and should not have to be the tax collectors for states throughout the nation. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor. That the quorum call be initiated again.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.